getting Peter online momentarily, but now we're going to look at the same graphic in the open section. You can see there Hikaru Nakamura. He got eliminated by Pragnananda, the birthday boy, in the Rapids yesterday. Wesley So in the classical portion of the fourth round by Alexei Sarana, and more bloodshed in the open section. Fabiano Caruana, he defeats Ray Robson. Jan Nepomniachtchi barely survives against Nihal Sarin in the rapid. Gukesh, he defeats Andrei Yesipenko. And, of course, Nikita Vitugov, Norbek Abdusatorov, they were knocked out a long time ago. And Jan Krzysztof Duda, the only player still remaining who has won a World Cup before. That actually is a pretty staggering statistic. Here we go. This is the round of 16 that we will be watching today. I think the top matchup that we will be focusing most of our time on is, of course, Magnus Carlsen against Vassily Ivanchuk. It is a battle of the generations that we have been looking forward to for a long time. Ivanchuk having one of the World Cups of his life, of course, up there in age. He is over 50 years old. Not expected by everybody to get this far. But man, Vassily Ivanchuk has been a beast. He's had nerves of steel, and he just defeated Vahapsanal in the tiebreaker, Peter, to get this matchup against Magnus that we are all so excited about. For surviving, I don't want to say a scare yesterday, but surviving probably one of the most difficult emotionally matches of his career.
Yeah, well, it's the good news, I think, that he gets the white pieces against Gukesh, because I'm pretty sure that he's completely exhausted after what we have seen yesterday, and he just basically couldn't believe that he qualified. It was such an even match, and that final game was also not exactly clear how it's going to end, and then he wins that game, qualifies. We also see now Vassily Ivanchuk waiting for Magnus Carlsen, and there is the handshake between two incredible legends.
The first I ever saw of Ivanchuk playing Carlsen was a World Blitz Championship game that they played. Ivanchuk won that game. He checkmated Magnus Carlsen and almost jumped out of his chair. And Magnus Carlsen was not happy to get checkmated by Ivanchuk. So these two are no strangers to classical encounters. They're no strangers to Blitz encounters. And just so great, Peter, to see a battle between generations. Someone who I'm sure Magnus Carlsen respects tremendously, but will try his best to defeat in the classical portion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Vassily Ivanchuk, everybody has incredible respect, and I believe that chess is about respect, mutual respect. And when you know exactly that someone devotes all his life to the game of chess, and he's trying to perfectionize his chess all his life, and this is what we are seeing. I'm so happy for Ivanchuk that he's here and he gets a chance to fight it against Magnus.
To maintain his level at his age, to maintain his love for the game at his age, and to maintain the modesty and the gentlemanliness that he has shown throughout his career makes him one of the most well-liked, one of the most loved characters on the chess tournament circuit, and I think that's a very well-earned distinction. And the clocks begin. Magnus taking 15 seconds on his first move. We are off. Welcome to round 5. Game 1 of the 2023 World Cup, and we are underway with 1d4 by Mr. Carlsen.
Yeah, I also feel like these are two virtuosos. Yeah, they can play any single opening with the white color, with the black color. None of them can really predict the opponent's choice. And there we see d4, d5 on the board.
Indeed. And knight f3, kind of a non-committal move by Magnus Carlsen. This doesn't mean he won't play the Queen's Gambit, but it could also signal that he will play g3, or the London system with bishop f4, or even Hikaru's favorite move against knight f6, bishop g5. That is, of course, a lot less likely. There's also the Kali system with e3. So knight f3 opens a lot of doors.
Yeah, I'm kind of always mystified when white goes second move, knight f3, that what exactly is white trying to achieve if, for example, black plays the most conservative ways with knight f6? Because if you wanted to play the London system, then okay, probably you could have also started with bishop f4. And I don't really believe that Magnus against Chucky wants to play something offbeat like the I believe that he wants to go a little bit more mainstream.
Does Chucky have a clear opening repertoire at this stage of his career, or does he sort of play everything?
I think he never had. That was
Oh, wow.
the whole point, that he was mastering everything. And it was basically, he was also a psychologist. He was always trying to understand which type of positions his opponent on the given day would love to avoid. And exactly that's what he was trying to get. And I believe that Magnus has also highlighted many times in his interviews that he feels like he is most similar to Ivanchuk, yeah, because it's also Magnus's kind of approach, that he is able to play any structure, any opening, and he likes to target the opponent psychologically, not with exactly move per move preparation, but just that, you know what, this type of player probably does not like to get into this and that type of position. Let me try to get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like he was ahead of his time. If he was doing that, 10, 15 years ago, when it was still much more customary to have a narrow opening repertoire, even among the top players. Obviously, Ivanchuk really famous for his victories over Garry Kasparov early in his chess career. They had a couple of affairs in the Sicilian defense, which were uncharacteristically crushing losses for Garry. I mean, you couldn't even count on one hand, the number of players who could defeat Garry like that at the prime of his chess career, because there were less than five, and probably even less than three. Maybe just Ivanchuk and Vladimir Kramnik a little bit later. But what a colossal figure in chess. And Vasil taking his time. Obviously, knight f6 is not forced. I mean, you could play e6. You could play c6. That's not a move that you see too often. I don't know exactly why. What is the downside of c6 if you're planning to play the Slav against c4? And you could play c7, c5, which is an older move, but a lot less reputable, I think, in modern years because of c4.
Yeah, the point is that I think the mind games continue. After d4, d5, it's not yet exactly clear if Ivanchuk, after the move c4, would take d takes c4, the accepted queen's gambit, or would he go for Slav structures, or would he just simply play e6? And with the move knight f3, Magnus kind of asked him that, please show me which direction you're gonna go. And I told you that somehow these players sense these moments very well, and Vasil taking his time.
Yeah. And we'll see. Knight f6, e6. Obviously, you don't want to take too long. Vasil known for his time trouble tendencies. I wonder if that's part of Magnus's pre-game routine or strategy to, make more flexible moves to try to get Ivanchuk to think longer in critical moments. But at the end of the day, you just play chess and see what happens. And Ivanchuk plays e6. Okay, so e6, which means he was not. It doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't planning to play the Queen's Gambit accepted. I mean, c4, d takes c4, is that a line? Is that a move? No. I don't know.
It's a bit strange, yeah, exactly. Because
yeah, exactly. Like, I can't figure it out. Is it normal to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because usually what we are talking about, d4, d5, c4, d takes c4, and if white plays the move knight f3, then black has some other options. I think the sideline with a6 is kind of has a very solid reputation, a part of the main classical move with knight f6, but I have never really been thinking about the move e6 at this moment.
Yeah, neither have I. It's sometimes you ask yourself, wait, is this a line? And then you start thinking and you can't quite put your finger on it. So if Magnus plays c4 right now, I think we are much more likely to see knight g8 out to f6, which also tells us nothing about what opening we're going to see. That's one of the least clearly defined positions in the Queen's Gambit decline, because it could jump out into a Ragozin, you could get a Catalan, you could get this early knight f3 bishop g5 line that has no name, that is occasionally trotted out by the top players. So, man, really no clear definition yet on what we're going to get out of the opening.
Yes, I'm very curious to see where does this end. And Magnus, yes, sipping from his water. He doesn't want to define it yet.
Enjoying the moment.
Yes.
I mean, enjoying that he's there, right? Enjoying that he is in Baku right now and not, on Baltic Air from Baku to... I don't think there's a Baku to Oslo direct flight. I'd guess that there isn't, but, maybe Baku to Frankfurt. Just the fact that he's playing this tournament, because he was one move away. He was one capture on e4 away from being sent packing. And a bit of a deeper dive and see how Vasil is faring. He is up on the clock. And first impressions, Peter, is that Black's position seems safe as houses if this latest move works out tactically, which it seems that it does.
Yeah, it's a stunning move, e65. If it works, it basically means that black solves all his problems. But in order to understand what happened, we have to go back, because we have seen the mind games between the players, d4, d5, knight f3, e6. It wasn't exactly clear to us where this eventually will lead us to. Now we get the answer that it was the Catalan. So after a lot of mind games, the players got to play what probably they had expected from the game. Was bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop e7, bishop g2, and wow, here Ivanchuk, being Ivanchuk, he doesn't like to follow the typical fashionable lines, and he opts for a move c6. Okay, c6 is still kind of common, but I mean that he already played c6 before castles. Okay, queen c2, knight b7, bishop f4 castles, h4, and yes, this is exactly how, this is the Dubov kind of idea, this h4. Magnus has used it already, and look at this, Chucky strikes in the center immediately after h4, d takes c4. It's not the traditional, this is what I meant, that isn't the player who just blindly follows that, you know what, I want to play b6, bishop b7, so I'm gonna play b6, bishop b7 against anything. No, he keeps an open mind. He sees that, wow, Magnus has played the move h4. It has a specific idea. White is not playing the quiet castles. Then I have to switch. And this is what I'm loving. And somebody is so flexible to do that.
That's awesome. Chucky just always thinks independently. And he, for that reason, he comes up with so many creative ideas. He's just a factory of interesting ideas and concepts. And he puts that knight on d5, pressuring the bishop. Magnus dutifully obliges and slides the bishop up to g5, which I assume is one of the ideas of the move h4. You're not just trying to go h5 and h6. You're also anchoring the bishop on that square. And the logic is that the trade of dark squared bishops, it positionally should favor white because black is left with this dud of a bishop on c8, although we'll get back to that in a second. We have the trade on e7, e4 chasing away the knight, Magnus playing for maximum. Knight drops back to b6 with tempo. And I feel like this move e5 that Ivanchuk has just played is a crucial resource. Without this move, Magnus would achieve his dream setup. He's traded the dark squared bishops. He has the center. He's left black with an awkward, French-like bishop on c8. And Ivanchuk, sensing the urgency of the moment, and he didn't take a lot of time to calculate this move e5. Now, first thing that a lot of people in the chat will wonder is what happens not after d takes c5. I think that is clear. Black can play rook e8 at a minimum. But after knight takes c5, if you try knight takes c5 and rook e8, white can support the pawn with f2, f4. And I think the idea is incredibly intelligent. Knight b6 strikes at the queen with knight a4. Still, white has queen d4. And here I think the crux of black's idea is revealed. I think it's b7, b5 after queen d4. And white cannot stabilize the queen in the center because rook d8 is coming. And even crazier, after queen to d6, trying to force the queens off the board, black's queen drops back to e8. And then quickly, black brings the bishop out, brings the rook to d8, and develops a huge initiative against white's poorly developed pieces and against white's queen, which is going to get, kicked around once the rook comes into d8. Really, really smart play by Ivanchuk.
Fantastic play by Ivanchuk. I mean, I'm loving this fine play and open-mindedness. Also, one has to give credit to his preparation. I believe that he somehow sensed it. I mean, Magnus can play so many different things, but somewhere the Catalan was on the radar of Vasil. He did maybe even anticipate the move h4. I mean, clearly this idea of d takes c4, it's not something that you can cook up over the board in 1-2 minutes. It's a very deep concept. It just goes on to show also that Chucky is still very heavily working on chess, and it's so nice to see this.
Amazing. Yeah. DC, definitely a very committal move, a move whose idea you have to understand. Maybe not in this exact position, but definitely a concept that was on Chucky's radar before this game. So coming back to this position after e5, the crazy thought is that white might be the one not struggling for equality. I think I don't want to overstate the case here. I think the position is equal, but if you had to choose a side, I'm not so confident that I would choose white here, because let's say white castles, let's say white accepts that, d takes c5, knight takes c5 doesn't work. White castles, black plays ed. If white plays knight takes d4, Then black has this very nice c5 square for his knight, knight d7 to c5. And then black's pieces, come out really nicely. Rook on d8. And the move h2, h4 has a drawback of giving up the g4 square, Peter.
Yes, that's a very serious commitment. Otherwise, white would always play this type of positions with a nice h3, rook e1, stabilizing everything, and eventually also playing against black's bishop on c8. But now with this new factor with the pawn on h4, I believe that long-term play is absolutely no problem for black. One also has to keep an eye on some knight a4 ideas, so white might even have to lose tempo on b3. The knight from b1 has not yet developed. It's nice to be black. It resembles some kind of a g3 Grunfeld, but a wonderful version for black, even without the weakening with g6 and the dark squares. I'm simply loving Chuky's position.
Yeah, he is playing for maximum with the black pieces. Active, energetic, intelligent chess being played here. And is it the case that did Magnus overlook e5? I think I'm leaning towards saying yes. I feel like if Magnus knew that e5 would follow, he probably would choose a different square for his queen, because c3, I think we can agree, is not the worst square on the board, but it is a little bit awkward, right? You're subject to a potential attack by black's knight. You're taking away the c3 square, which would be a good developing square for white's knight. So maybe Magnus would have chosen a different square if he knew that e5 was a bygone conclusion.
Yes, also that basically if he sensed any kind of danger, he would have not played e4. Yeah, if white wants to just be totally safe, he could have played knight c3, but basically this is such a soft move, then you know exactly that black will play knight b6. After queen d3, black plays e5, black solves all the problems, but then white is also absolutely not in any danger. The pawn on e4, after the move e5, is not entirely well placed because it blocks also white's bishop. Yeah, this is one of the problems that we are seeing here at the current position, that actually the bishop on g2 does absolutely nothing. The pawn on c6 anyways beautifully placed there. This b7 c6 pawn structure is a typical granite that blocks the Catalan bishop. But the pawn on e4 and the pawn on h4, look at Magnus's body language. It does not signal that he really enjoys the moment he's in now.
And he might be a little bit annoyed because, okay, you survive against Vincent. You survive an incredibly difficult match, which had so many emotions and such a roller coaster of events where you win on demand and then you come to the tiebreaker. You're winning both games. You fail to win a single one. You got to go to the 10-minute portion and, you win in a time scramble. It was such a difficult, energy-sucking match. And then you say, okay, I got white against, Vassily Ivanchuk, who's a genius, but it's not, a pairing that I think Magnus was necessarily fearing. And all of a sudden, you're only an hour into the round and bang, already you're facing serious difficulties. You're at a serious risk of ending up in a slightly worse position. It's got to be frustrating for Magnus to keep facing new challenges.
Yes, I believe that if he finds a safe way to navigate here, he doesn't mind the draw at all. I mean, clearly his confidence level is very high. He knows that he has nothing to fear with the black pieces. It's much more that sometimes when you want to achieve something from a position which doesn't let you, then you are taking such risk that it's no matter who you are, it can really backfire. And looking at Magnus, I feel like he feels that, yes, he needs to be cautious. The big question is, does he really have a good way of shutting things down?
Yeah, and I think that way might be to castle, ed, knight d4, the position that we were checking there with knight c5, knight d2. I think that's the position Magnus is going to end up going for. I think you can just sense he's displeased, he's nonplussed here, and he does, in fact, did he castle there? I think he did. Yes, Magnus not trusting, but spending a lot of time calculating knight takes c5, and a wise, mature decision by Magnus Carlsen to castle, to accept that black's opening problems are officially completely solved, but there's no need for white to get cavalier with his play.
Yeah, and look at this. Yeah, he doesn't get up after his move. It also indicates that he isn't happy with what happened. There's even a case to be made that after he takes d4, if we want to be super solid, then maybe we could capture with the queen, making sure that our knight lands on c3 as quickly as possible. Yes, the knight on f3 is ugly, That's why we would have preferred to capture that pawn with the knight. But maybe if safety first is our main primary aim, then even queen takes d4 comes into consideration.
For sure. That'll be another decision Magnus Carlsen has to make. Ivanchuk is not going to take on d4 automatically. He's going to probably invest some time on a flexible move like rook e8, but I honestly do not see what black garners from delaying the move he takes d4. I think we're very likely to see that move shortly.
Yes, exactly. Because also now white is probably already threatening to capture on e5. White has castled. That was one of the tactical problems white faced, that his king was still in the center. That's why it was not so nice to capture that pawn. All right, now things have slowed down. We also have understood that Ivanchuk has a wonderful opening, has no problems with the black pieces, gives us a chance to maybe take a look at some game that we haven't covered yet. Or if there is some crazy development in the Fabi's game, then we can also jump right in there. Coordinate his forces, and I'm loving what I'm seeing. This is the true mastery. It was so scary to be in white shoes. First of all, Magnus, after he takes d4, captured with the queen, making sure that he has the chance to eventually go knight c3 or knight b2. It's a very flexible move. And after knight c5, this move that Magnus came up with, rook f1 to c1, is a brilliant move. I mean, those are the moves that are so difficult. You sacrifice a pawn on e4. You feel like, you know what, I have to change the character of the game. And after knight takes e4, rook e1, f5, probably it's kind of forced, is met by knight c3, and suddenly all of white's pieces are back to life. The bishop on g2 awakes. There is a pin along the e file. I understand why Chucky refrained from this.
Totally. I mean, rook d8, queen e3, unpleasant, weak. And that's not what you're looking for when you're black here. You don't want to get this double-edged position with a lot of weaknesses. And rook c1, I honestly think epitomizes Magnus Carlsen's genius. He finds these deep resources in very plain vanilla positions where most players would go knight c3 or rook e1 almost automatically. Okay, the e4 pawn is hanging. We have to defend it. Magnus, he plumbs the depths of the position for these ways to find practical challenges for his opponent. And Ivanchuk, he took his time here. He played knight a6, which may seem awkward, but of course that knight from a6 can rejoin society via b4 or c5 or even c7 in some cases, as happened in the game. Now Carlsen, he develops his knight to d2, which I also like because it links up the knights. It potentially opens up the door for knight b3, knight a5, stuff like that. Okay, Ivanchuk completes his development with bishop g4. Carlsen plays another move that I really like, bishop f1, pressuring the knight on a6. Man, the way he's handling his pieces in this middle game is really impressive. And then the cherry on top, after Vasyl moves his knight away, of course, allowing bishop takes a6, not an option, Carlsen immediately gets to work on the queen side. Knight c7, a4, threatening to run this pawn up to a5 and cramp down on black's minor pieces. Now, I want to clarify, Peter, before I pass it back to you, that what we're talking about here are very minor advantages. The position is still objectively equal. You don't win these positions with one idea, you win them with 10 ideas. And I think Carlsen has initiated that process, which we're all so familiar with, when he takes a completely equal position and starts transforming it into a very uncomfortable one for his opponent. a5 is on the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we appreciate it. And it was so nice that we have witnessed the opening part. And we were scared for Magnus. Yeah, that when Chucky played that move e6, e5, breaking the construction, it looked like white is the one who has to be careful. And then Magnus with this psychological idea of rook c1 sacrificing that pawn. And Chucky was not ready, not willing to accept that sacrifice. It was just too risky. He wanted to be solid, but while he remained solid, gave the time for Magnus to coordinate his pieces. And that's the reason why I'm highlighting these pieces, that suddenly there is so much harmony in Magnus's position. Yes, the position might be more or less equal, a tiny little bit better maybe for white, but it's much more the feeling that we had before, that it looked like black is the one who has the perfect harmony, and it's so difficult for white to coordinate pieces. Just in 5 moves, Magnus managed to do that. Mm-hmm. That was true art.
There's this great Russian chess term, which literally goes vniknуть в позицию, and it means to it means literally to go deep into the position, but it really refers to someone who, in a critical moment, spends as long as it takes and finds a truly an idea or a setup that is beyond the surface of the position, right? Something that shows deep understanding, and Magnus does that so often and so well. Now, let me ask you this, Peter: is Ivanchuk uncomfortable here? Do you think Black's position is objectively uncomfortable after something like Rook F to E8? Or are we still talking at most about a very minor symbolic advantage for Magnus?
I think it's more about the psychological effect. Yeah, that seemingly Black was the one who got a very comfortable position when nothing can happen to him. And all of a sudden we get the transformation. Look at this. Chucky shows nerves. He plays the move bishop takes f3. Not a move that you really want to play, but it just shows that he's not that happy. He's trying to secure his position. He was really worried that white will be breaking his construction on the queen side with a6. And now he goes for a very solid but slightly passive position.
Ooh, he goes a6, but to me, at least visually, it seems like a concession to give up the bishop here. Why? Because white's bishop has a lot of active prospects. It can jump out to c4, it can jump out to h3, and it definitely feels like this is a turning point in the game, that Magnus is now very comfortable with his position. He also seems surprised at bishop takes f3. So my question, Peter, why not a6 immediately? What was Ivanchuk afraid of? What was the significance of that trade before playing a6?
Yes, I don't know, because one could argue that if the white pawn is on h3 instead of h4, then it's kind of very natural for Black to think about how do I get rid of that light square bishop, because you don't want to stay passive. It will be on the way of your other forces. But once the bishop is so nicely, comfortably sitting on the square on g4, why do you voluntarily take it? I think it's because of Magnus's previous 5 moves, the effect, the impact that it took on Chucky. And this is some kind of sign of nerves to finally, okay, let me just get rid of f3, let me play a6. Okay, I'm slightly worse, but I'm solid, I'm gonna sit. One should also highlight in this position that Black does have this b5 square for his knight, which is typical when white has advanced the pawn to a5. He can sit there, but the problem again that Black has 2 knights sitting and only one of them can sit on this square, the other knight will stay passive.
And of course, Magnus, the hard work continues in this position. He's got a lot of tough decisions to make, in particular the move e5. Maybe not immediately. I mean, it can be considered immediately because you can play against the knight on c8. If you give Black a couple of moves, Black will play knight e6, and then either knight a7, knight b5, or knight d6, knight b5. So maybe Ivanchuk is attracted to the possibility of playing for the d4 square, which can be used as a transit point and potentially an outpost for a lot of his pieces. The problem is that it's very cumbersome, right? It's going to take him many moves to get his knights, out of their dormant positions, and white can take those moves to activate his pieces. There's even a scintillating idea that involves lifting that rook from a1 up to a4 and then swinging it over to g4 after playing e5. So do not rule out an attack on Black's king here, which is a very standard reaction to a situation where your opponent has passive pieces. You say, I'm going to transfer my forces to the side of the board that contains my opponent's king. And Magnus has played rook a4.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the move you want to be playing. You want to bring that last piece, the rook from a1, into the game. Rook a4 is a multi-purpose move. You activate the rook, you keep all your options open. Depending how your opponent reacts, you keep that e5 rook g4 idea in mind. It just everything that happened in the last 6-7 moves illustrates Magnus's amazing feeling for all the details.
Lovely play by Carlsen. Ivanchuk also accelerating his pace of play. And rook f8, a very logical move. And will we see e5 from Carlsen? That's extremely likely. Like, you don't, as the expression goes, having said A, you have to say B. Rook a4 can also function as a defensive move because it protects the e4 pawn, yes, but I think Carlsen will not be able to resist, and maybe shouldn't resist, the temptation to get that rook across to the king side.
Yes, I mean, okay, we already spoke about the benefits of e5. We also have to talk about the downsides, that Black gets suddenly access to the d5 square. However, we feel that the d5 square isn't that important. Let's just illustrate this. If white goes e5, Black jumps with a tempo on d5. Yes, that knight is great. Look at the other knight on c8. That's completely out of the game. And now the big question is, how do we, and probably the reason why not queen e4, because that would allow black to play the stunning knight d6, using the fact that the e file is open and then the black knight activates. So white will have to move away with that queen, I don't know, and then where maybe queen b3, or yeah, maybe queen b3 is a nice square, eyeing the b7 pawn as well. And eventually you might be seeing some bishop d3, bishop b1, queen c2 ideas. And look at that black king. If ever white threatens queen h7 checkmate, it will be very difficult to defend. g6 might always run into h5. The rook can lift towards the g4 square, just to highlight some long-term dangers that black is faced with.
Yeah, and that pawn on e5, it's such a powerful pawn. It severs the connection between black's pieces. It controls d6, and it controls f6, and it makes it hard for black to marshal his troops on the king side. And you can sense the confidence with which Carlsen is playing. He is blitzing out his moves. I think he knows that he's taken over the initiative, and he has a commanding presence on the king side in the center. e5, knight d5 is on the board, and a big decision for Magnus Carlsen as he decides where to put his queen, Peter. The time situation is fine for both players, but the speed with which Magnus played his last few moves is a signal that he's starting to be very happy with the way that these events are transpiring here.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So far, everything was kind of logical. It was his plan. Now it's the big moment that where do you put the queen? Of course, if you could play queen e4, followed by bishop d3, you almost win the game automatically. But queen e4 runs into this very devilish trick with knight d6. The seemingly dead knight from c8 comes with a tempo. That's exactly the defensive resource what Chucky has set up with rook f8. And basically, I was mentioning that we have to find the square for the queen. It's not that obvious, because if you can't go to e4, you don't want to go to the d file. That's clearly in black's hand. And then queen e1, queen e2, queen b3. Those are the moves that are at your... And Magnus plays queen b3. Fascinating stuff. Very nice.
Against Magnus Carlsen. Maybe a quick update on our top game. There's Magnus, supremely confident. You know, he has turned this game around in the matter of like 4 or 5 moves. You know, this looked great for Ivanchuk. We were praising his opening play, and then bang, a couple of moves later, and Vasyl starts to panic, starts to lose the thread of the game. We have to check the position, because I think Magnus could initiate a direct assault against Vasyl's king, and the situation will get from bad to dire. Lenyar, by the way, found rook e3. We were checking that game before the break. What an absolute freaking beast he is. But we will keep an eye on that game. Magnus with 19 minutes, but look at how powerful his pieces are. He can play queen c2 here and set up threats against Ivanchuk's king and force the weakening move g6.
Yes, and we have seen exactly all this maneuvering that we talked about. Bishop d3, bishop b1, setting up that queen c2 threat. Ivanchuk has tried everything to stop white's main idea, that we spoke about, that queen c2, g6 will be met by h4, h5. That's not possible. However, white has another break on the king side. So let's just put this. Magnus is definitely thinking about queen c2, g6, all the consequences of a timely g4 break.
Oh, g4 is so nasty. Why is it so nasty? Well, white is threatening g takes h5, just breaking apart black's fragile pawn chain on the king side. If h takes g4, then that merely throws oil onto the flames. With rook takes g4, white will threaten the completely crushing h5. So I think in this position, black's best chance is to seek some sort of counterplay in the center, maybe through that d4 square. I mean, that's what Ivanchuk wanted in the first place. So maybe knight e6, g takes h5, knight d4, trying to muddy the waters can be considered, but I'm deeply skeptical that this is going to result in success. There is one tactical trick, though, that's so easy to miss. If white plays knight takes d4, and queen e4, that looks excellent. You keep the battery going. Black has this queen takes e5 resource, and this gives black a new lease on life, because queen takes e5. Obviously, there's rook takes e5, and then the knight picks back the rook with knight f3 check. White is probably still better there, but I think Magnus should avoid that line and choose a different square for his queen, Peter, after knight d4.
Yes, I believe that this is exactly the line that Magnus is calculating. The big question for him that, what happens after knight b4? Because if you can't really nicely play the move queen e4, then again, you have to place that queen to an awkward square. And I mean, convincing yourself, placing queen in an awkward square when you're actually searching for harmony is so difficult humanly, and your soul doesn't want to let that happen. You definitely want to make sure that the queen can go to e4. So I believe we can maybe continue that position: knight d4, queen e4, queen takes e5, and then move h take g6. Is this move working? What are the consequences of this move?
Well, first big question, I think, is what happens in the event of knight f3 check, which, forks the rook. And actually, it looks like white can play queen f3, queen e1, king g2. And when the smoke clears, let me just look at black's king. White's remaining pieces are surrounding black's king. I think this is out of the question because black has no way to force the queen trade. The bishop is untouchable due to mate in 2. Maybe there is some way to stay afloat here, but that's an important detail. The second thing I would ask is what happens in the event of the queen trade. So after h takes g6, queen takes e4, white has to take with the rook, very important. Or maybe gf first.
Okay, yes, we can first take.
Takes,
and
rook
capture
takes. What do you make of this endgame?
Well, it's pawn up, but it isn't so clear that this is winning for white. Yeah, black's construction is very solid. The knight on d4 is a monster. White's rook on a4 did not shift all the way to the king side, and white's pawns are slightly vulnerable. So I believe that from a black's perspective, if you calculate this and you are anyway terrified by white's attack, then you think like, okay, let me get there and try to hold this position.
Yeah, I think compared to what we just saw, this is almost a relief. Of course, it's torture, and I think Magnus's winning chances here would outweigh the black's drawing chances. But at this point, Ivanchuk is kind of grasping at straws. So all of this came from queen c2 and g4. We often say long variation, wrong variation. But, to unlock all of these complications, Magnus would have to decide on the direct approach. And he isn't playing quickly. He's already taken, 6-7 minutes on this move. Could he be attracted to some other quieter candidate move, or do you think he will decide on queen c2 and g4?
Well, the question is that does he have a quieter move? Yeah, because black is clearly trying to set up knight e6. So there is a certain time pressure on white, yeah, to try to make the most out of your situation. I somehow feel that Magnus should probably go for it unless he finds a very nice stabilizing move with which he feels that he can simply play on for a long time without advantage, but I'm not exactly seeing it.
Yeah, knight g5 came across my mind as a tempting move, but I don't think it does anything. It doesn't threaten anything. And black will play knight e6. Okay, we're about to get a move from Carlsen, and it, I think, is queen c2. Yes. Ivanchuk immediately responds with g6, and this is the moment of truth. Queen c2 is a move that you could throw in. And now g4, the move that we focused on, you could also deploy your bishop to a2 and threaten queen takes g6 check. But I'm also not too attracted by that because of knight e6, blocking the influence of white's bishop. And he plays it. He plays bishop a2, but maybe he wants g4 on the next move. Maybe he wants to meet knight e6 with g4.
Well, interesting, because Ivanchuk also reacted instantly with king g7. He feels that the position is dangerous. He has to try to put Magnus under pressure clockwise. The position is clearly in Magnus's favor. And now after king g7, it's a fantastic move because g4 can be answered by rook h8. So black is not forced to do something on the king side. He can try to stabilize it.
And I really like how Ivanchuk is playing for Magnus's clock. The decision to play king g7 quickly, it's a gutsy one. Black's position is scary. It's easy to rationalize spending, 20 minutes here. But Ivanchuk feels confident that his best chance is to complicate this game. Magnus with 14 minutes now for 9 moves, and that's a lot of moves to play, especially if the situation sharpens up even further after g4, rook h8. White can swing the rook, Peter, to f4 at some moment. Rook f4 is possible, and then black has many ways to defend the f7 pawn, mostly knight e6 and knight d5. And probably knight d5 is for choice because knight e6 can be met with bishop takes e6, and you cannot recapture with the queen because of knight g5, forking the queen and the f7 pawn. So rook f4, knight d5 honestly looks kind of stable for black. I'm not getting the vibes that black is imminently losing here at all.
Yeah, it's very sharp, a battle basically. I mean, let's just put it on the board to understand what will it talk about. g4, rook h8, rook f4, hitting that pawn. But there is also one other aspect that at some point e5, e6 also looks so tempting. And the reason why it's so tempting is that now that the pawn is on g4, if, for example, we just back here to the current position, if white plays e6, which is very thematic and very natural, I believe that black's best reaction is f7, f5, making sure that you lock the position down, eliminate any kind of g4 ideas. Yes, white has certainly many interesting options, but black is setting up some kind of a defense, and this is what Chucky is relying on. On the other hand, after g4, rook h8, e6, there is no more f5. How are you gonna keep the position locked?
God, e6 is just a power move. And if you have to play knight takes e6, then white could play the simple bishop e6, fe. Okay, the tempting move here is knight g5, but there's also rook a4 to e4, maybe even stronger. And here it feels like black's position is completely crumbling. Yeah, this already feels lost. So can g4 be met with anything other than rook h8? I don't really think so. Again, if you have to play h takes g4 and you allow the rook to get into the attack via the g file, then h5 becomes a massive threat, and e6 becomes an even stronger threat than it is in this position. No, I think g4, I'm looking at this more carefully, and the more I look at this, the more powerful white's attacking ideas start to seem.
Yes, on the other hand, the problem for white is that he has tons of opportunities and very tempting options. However, everywhere black seems to be having some kind of a response. Yeah, this drive one crazy. Yeah? You feel like, okay, there should be something how forcefully I can make the most out of my position. But
Totally.
every single line keeps on going on and doesn't give you this total clarity that you can easily make up your mind.
Yeah, there's nothing super clean, so g4 and e6, that's a hard sequence to find, especially because you might see e6 here, then spot f7, f5 and say, oh, okay, the e6 idea doesn't work. So this is a very common type of mistake where you see an idea, it doesn't work the way that you want it to, and then you kind of subconsciously abandon it and you forget to check it in another position. I mean, we're talking about some really complex lines. Magnus now down to 11 minutes. This is going to be a fascinating next 9 moves, and anything can happen. The position very double-edged. And remember, double-edged does not mean that one side isn't much better. Magnus might be objectively winning, but the position remains highly tactical and highly volatile.
Yes, black has all these knight e6, knight bd4 ideas. Also, the point is that with g3, g4, white is breaking his own construction as well, and white's king in the long run will also not feel safe. Eventually, black's knights are jumping. We also saw one line where black, after knight e6, knight bd4, got access to all these queen takes e5 tricks with the forking idea on, with knight f3. So much to consider. And with 10 minutes on the clock, I believe that Magnus is also looking for some practical way of keeping the pressure on without risking too much.
Yes, it's exactly right. Something to avoid the craziest of complications given his time situation. And look at Ivanchuk just blitzing out the responses. Knight to g5 and rook f8 is Vasyl's response, protecting the f7 pawn. Now, obviously, bishop takes f7 out of the question. You do not want to give both of your minor pieces up for black's rook. And what is the follow-up? This is what I'm curious about. Is it queen c2 to e4? Just kind of a general centralizing move. Is it rook f4? But again, we've talked about it. Rook f4 runs into knight d5, and you have to keep an eye on the d4 square. Rook f3 would get forked due to knight b5 to d4. Man, this is getting really tense, and it almost reminds me of the Dominguez game in that Magnus has outplayed Ivanchuk the last 15 moves, completely outplayed him, and yet the path to actually converting this into something tangible is narrow and filled with landmines.
Yes, and the reason why Ivanchuk opted for rook e8 to f8 instead of knight d5, which would have been so-called very natural, that, okay, you just jump with the knight to d... Hops. Because Magnus has already made a move. So rook f8 was answered by e6. We just got... wow. Oof. All right. Direct confrontation.
Here we go. Now, f5, first question. What happens after f5? Oh, it might be knight f7? No, rook f7.
Rook f7. Yeah, let's just show this, that this would run into this tactic on the e1 rook.
Indeed.
f6 played.
And f6 already played. But bishop b1 would force black to play f5. And maybe Ivanchuk sees that. He wants the white bishop to depart a2 so that the white's control over the e6 pawn is softened up a little bit. And what is Magnus's response after bishop b1, f5? It's a hard position to accurately evaluate. It's clear that white is better, but how much better?
Yes. And what do you do with the position? Do you try to go for some direct. Okay, the good thing in bishop b1 f5 is that you don't need to move the knight anymore. Yeah, then the knight gets safety. On the other hand, there is this moment the chance of maybe giving an argument for knight h3, knight f4, but clear knight h3 will be met by knight d4. I'm believing, and then you have to calculate a lot. The queen will be attacked immediately.
There's also an interesting setup where you go bishop b1 f5, and then you try to go queen c1 to protect the rook, and then knight f7 with the idea of infiltrating h6. But Magnus, he's making moves, and he has played bishop b1. We will get this position on the board, and Ivanchuk has already responded with f5. His last 5 moves, he spent an average of 3 seconds per move on, clearly making a play against White's clock time.
Yes, and I'm highlighting already what you just mentioned, that yes, there is this very instructive idea, and typical also kind of, it's a common knowledge that the queens and the bishop combination works the best if you place the queen on another square than the bishop. Yeah, this bishop queen battery has already done the job, weakened all the dark squares in black's position, so now it's time to place that queen on dark square.
Indeed, big decision here. And it appears, by the way, that we are about to get a result in our Caruana Duda game. A fascinating Petrov battle, which looks good for Fabio at some point, but Duda with some excellent play neutralizing Fabiano Caruana's advantage. They are about to draw. So I'm keeping an eye on that game as well. When we get a result, we will pan out to that game and hopefully catch the handshake. But nonetheless, just felt like I should mention it. Queen c1 played. And Ivanchuk's only way of protecting himself against this knight f7, queen h6 idea. First of all, there's knight d6, but that seems very passive. He can also try to anchor himself to the e6 pawn so that when White plays knight f7, he's able to capture that pawn with the rook. So rook d6 also comes to mind here, but it feels like he's teetering on the edge of catastrophe.
Yeah, because actually after rook d6, White can bring that bishop back to a2. Look at this. The bishop started its journey from g2. We spoke about that the bishop on g2 was doing nothing. Magnus played bishop f1, bishop d3, bishop b1, bishop a2, bishop b1 back. And we might be seeing bishop a2 back again if black plays the move rook d6.
And he could have squeezed more out of that position, but nonetheless, good stuff there from Duda and Caruana. Okay, we can go back to the game because we've got more really interesting developments. Rook comes out to d5, but he walks Peter right into bishop a2.
Yeah, bishop a2 or also knight f7. I mean, the rook d5 move didn't really do that much. On knight f7, knight e6, is that possible? I mean, we have to calculate. It looks very shaky for black.
Knight back to g5 and bishop a2. God, this has to be just dead lost for black.
Yes.
Knight bc7. Bishop a2, rook d6, and you just need, you can blow on that knight on e6 and it'll collapse. Yeah, queen c3. Oh, God. Okay, resigns. Yeah. No, this is disaster.
Where
rook
do you
f6,
go?
probably.
Wow. So, but after rook d5, I think Magnus has played already. Yeah, he played bishop a2. That was the other move, that you simply target that rook. Magnus anyway wanted to get his bishop back to a2. Bishop a2. Rook c5, and probably we're gonna see the move rook c4, which looks very natural, eliminating that powerful rook on c5. The rook on a4 is already now not joining the battle. It has already done the job, provoking all those weaknesses. The reason why black started pushing the pawn to h5 was to fight for that g4 square, and also to stop h5, of course. I'm expecting rook c4, just queen d2. I mean, Magnus is spoiled by choice.
Yeah, and it almost feels like White sacrificed something big to get this position, right? To get all of the assets in the center and on the king side. But no, White's only sacrificed a pawn. So there's no reason for Magnus to feel like he has to punish Ivanchuk in 3 moves.
He hasn't sacrificed at all. Nothing.
Oh, it's even material.
Exactly.
It's even material. Yes. Oh my gosh. No, goodbye. I mean, I'm so used to seeing a position like this where White's down a piece or at least down a pawn. No, Ivanchuk has nothing to suffer for, and Magnus is in no hurry. He's going to go rook c4, trade black's only active piece, and the combined threats of knight f7, queen h6, coupled with the presence of that massive pawn on e6, the possibility of queen c1 to c3 check, should the knight on b5 run back to d6. There's too many avenues, too many things to keep track of. I don't see Vasyl surviving this position.
Yeah, not at all. And also now the clock situation is in very much in Magnus's favor. There is only 4 moves to be played before the time control. He has 7 minutes, more than 7 minutes, plus the 30 seconds increment, and the position is such that he has already made all the tough decisions. Yeah, now it's basically time to cash in, and the position seems like simply gives him all the chances to do that by simple measures.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was counting the pawns, I was like, okay, a5, b2. Black has a 3-on-2 on the queen side. Black is up a pawn. I forgot that the thing that's sitting on e6 is also a pawn, and it counts as a pawn, but it's a beast of a pawn. And
Yes.
it will be the game-winning pawn here if Magnus keeps his composure with his time ticking down. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to make until that extra 30 minutes. And Ivanchuk's best chance of a miracle swindle is a mistake sometime in these next 4 moves.
Yeah, if the time trouble is made, then there is no way for black to solve this. And Ivanchuk, that's why we saw that computer said that rook d5 was a mistake, but Chuki felt like my only chance is to blitz my moves out. And by blitzing your moves out in such a complicated position, you cannot play perfect chess. Yeah, you just have to risk it that maybe my moves are not the most perfect, but they are kind of unpleasant. They force my opponent to spend some time, and maybe I can somehow coordinate my defenses.
There is an instructive mistake here that white could make, which is queen e3. And I think that might run into f5, f4, and then maybe the rook from c5 can swing over to f5, generating some practical counterplay. Oh, no, f4, rook takes f4. Sorry, I forgot about the rook on a4. So I don't know what exactly black's intention is after queen e3. Maybe it's knight d5. That doesn't look good either. I don't know. Yeah, maybe queen e3 also possible here. And that's what's making Magnus think. He's got rook c4, queen d2, and queen e3, and he's really trying to squeeze the maximum out of this move so that, this game doesn't drag on longer than it has to.
Yeah, but he's not done to 5 minutes, still perfectly good, and he has played the move queen e3.
Okay, so the eval bar shoots down a little bit. Is it because of knight c7 to d5? And what happens if white just drops the queen back to d2 then, right? So it's funny, white could play queen d2, rook d8, queen e3, but Magnus is likely going to do it the other way around. Queen e3, knight d5, queen d2. And if Ivanchuk plays rook d8, again, there is this knight f7, queen h6 trick that we should not forget about.
Yes, and look at that rook on c5 is kind of trapped. Black's construction is just very shaky. So queen e3, very nice move, and basically fits perfectly into this perfect harmony approach of Magnus Carlsen. Yeah, he does not want to make any decisions. He feels like this rook on c5 is an awkward piece. Why should I trade that rooks? There is no reason to trade any rooks here for white. He keeps all the pieces on the board and basically invites knight d5. How is Vasil reacting? I mean, knight f7 is a deadly threat with the queen h6. Chuki has played the move knight d5 on the board.
Yep, as expected, and queen d2 will follow quickly, I think. Of course, queen e5 check is something to investigate, but why would you allow knight d5 back to f6? Why seek complications when you can just chill on this very nice central square on d2?
But there is also an argument that after knight f6, there is queen takes c5, queen takes e5, e7, setting up knight e6 fork.
Beautiful idea. I think we got to show that really quickly. But does it work? Knight c7 there maybe is an annoying defense.
Oh my god, yes, knight c7, fantastic defense. Yes, okay, but Magnus has made a move. Queen d2, yes.
As expected. And rook d, rook d, knight f7 again. Knight f7 is a huge threat. Knight f7, queen h6. How does Ivanchuk stop that?
Yeah, well, I guess there is no stopping position. Okay, somewhere some f5, f4. Yeah, it's kind of the only chance, but I don't see it's ever working.
It's one of those things where, the eval bar dropped a little bit, but we shouldn't put too much stock in it. Just look at this position with your own eyes. I mean, it's total misery for Vassily and Carlsen now within 2 moves of making time control. He's got to be very comfortable here.
And also, let us highlight that the queen on e7, it's famous that you don't want the strongest piece, the queen, blocking a pawn because that's just too much of a handicap. And this is what black is faced with. The queen cannot really move because of e7, then knight e6 check. with triple fork and whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing really moves. Yeah, it's so difficult to even suggest a move for black.
I mean, f4 here is a shot into thin air. White can just play g takes f4. And moreover, I mean, bishop from a2 can drop back to b1. Vasil, I think, played rook f6, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, rook f6. Okay, so he's preventing knight f7, because then there will be rook takes c6. But even b4 white can play and win a pawn on d5, among other things. Hard move to play, though, because it shuts down your own rook.
Yes, exactly. I was highlighting that rook on c5, and I was toying with the idea of going b4, but I was never exactly sure that unless I'm completely sure that I'm completely winning, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Because black plays rook c3 and you give up some squares. Okay, so Magnus still has some work to do. I mean, this is winning, but it's not winning because of anything forced. It's winning just because of the superiority of white's pieces. But you actually have to destroy black's defensive construction here. And that's not easy to do because knight f7, well, it meets with rook takes c6. Black is holding on for the time being.
Yes, Chucky is putting up incredible resistance. Magnus
Yep.
quickly glanced at his score sheet just to make sure that how many moves do I have to make till the time control. It's 2. And b4 is a little bit of a tough decision in time trouble. Yeah, that, okay, you understand that probably you are winning a pawn, but at the same time, you spoil the harmony with that move.
And you have to factor in this very nasty counter chance. When you look with the engine, you see, okay, b4, the rook has to move. I play bishop takes d5, cd, queen takes d5. But then in that resulting position, there's the move f5, f4. And that attacks the g3 pawn. The rook on a4 is out of the game. So maybe there's knight e4 after that. No, there isn't because the rook takes e6. So, actually, the situation is a lot more complicated than it may appear. And I think Ivanchuk's defense has been a lot better than the engine gives it credit for. I think he is succeeding in posing serious practical challenges to Magnus. And there it is. What did he play? He played the move b4. It's on the board. He's gone for it.
Yes, he had calculated everything. Rook c3, he takes on d5 instantly. I believe the key will be that queen d7 is a big threat there in the endgame. And after queen takes d7, ed, the transformation and access to knight e6 check plus rook e7 check and that pawn on d7, that's the decisive element.
Great point. Of course, if you rush queen d7, black has ways to deal with it, like rook c7 or king f8 runs into knight h7 check. Very pretty X-ray fork. But yeah, the fact that you can play queen d7 at any moment and force the queen trade, it takes a lot of the luster from black's counterplay on the king side because it will never lead to something like checkmate if white can take the queens off the board. Well, time control, folks. It has been hit. Magnus takes on d5. We will enter the next stage of the game, the technical phase of the game, as Ivanchuk plays his only serious counterplay move. That is f4. But we will take this opportunity to go on a break. Magnus will presumably take a little bit of time here, gather himself, and set himself up for what will be a sparkling victory if he can carry this point home. You're watching the 2023 World Cup from Baku, Azerbaijan. This is the first match game of the 5th round. We will be back with more action from Magnus's games, as well as the other great games in the open and women's section on the other side of this break. and a result. Magnus Carlsen has won his game there. As we see him setting up the pieces, Vassily Ivanchuk, he reaches move 40, realizes the hopelessness of his situation. With all that extra time, has no doubt in his mind that Magnus Carlsen will convert his commanding position and a decisive advantage, a first match game victory in typical Magnus Carlsen style, creating problems out of nothing. An excellent opening for Ivanchuk, but some incredibly five-head play from Carlsen, generating issues and a panicky move by Ivanchuk. It all started, Peter, with bishop takes f3, and it all went downhill from there.
Yes, and then Magnus never looked back, never gave Ivanchuk any chances. I mean, Chucky did try his practical chance of playing as quickly as possible in a very awkward position, just to make sure that Magnus feels some pressure on the clock. Magnus handled it perfectly. I would also say that the last couple of moves, that after move 40, we speculated about that. Eventually, because of the ugly plays rook on a4 and black creating some chances with f5, f4, things are not that simple. Magnus did not see any ghost. He simply took the pawn almost instantly, as if he just continues the game with the same time as he had before, continuing the time pressure, rook f5, queen e4, setting up the rook d1, rook d7 idea. And Ivanchuk has seen enough. He congratulates Magnus Carlsen on this wonderful masterpiece.
And wonderful masterpiece is exactly right. Carlsen wins another game that will enter his collection, and Ivanchuk is going to have to win on demand tomorrow with the white pieces, something that he has done before in his chess career. And that is our third result of the day. We could say that the top three boards have now been decided. Carlsen wins the first decisive game of the day. Caruana and Duda made a draw, as did Vidit and Nepomniachtchi. And here we see the bird's eye view, the remaining 5 games, one of which I think is close, 2 of which I think are close to being decided. The Grandelius Aragaisi game has to be concluding pretty soon, I think, in a peaceful result. And the same goes for Berkish against Prague. I actually think Prague is the one pushing just a little bit against Berkish. He's got that space advantage on the king side. But again, I don't see Ferenc losing that game. We might see a lot of draws today as the players kind of settle into the 5th round of mini matches.